Hey everybody, welcome to the Coffeehouse Conversations podcast, and I'm your host Amos St. John, and we're actually coming to the end of season 1, I've been so overwhelmed with the love and support of this podcast. The audience is growing, and the support is growing, but I never thought I'd be doing this. Especially, being so transparent and letting y'all in to get to know me a little bit, especially of my history and what I've come from and where I am. Because, I'm an introvert by default, for those who know me. But I believe that sharing these lessons and thoughts from my experiences can hopefully help someone become their best version of themselves. So on today's episode, I really want to talk about a fear of the mirror. Seriously, how many people, including ourselves, are afraid of being self-aware? Meaning, can you look at yourself and be totally honest about your flaws, your quirks, your strengths, your weaknesses? I mean, it's crazy how many people won't be honest with themselves. For me, I felt like in order for me to heal, be whole, and grow as an individual, I had to take some time to look in the mirror and be honest with myself. Now, if you've been following me in this podcast, you've heard the stories I've shared of my recent experiences with dealing with my challenge with my health and fitness, with the comparison game, issues with recognizing my value and self-worth when I dealt with unbalanced humility, overcoming the effects of rejection and trauma with the episode Rejection Sucks, and then the most recent one and with dealing with unforgiveness, about the weight of unforgiveness. All of these issues I discussed in these podcasts did not become clearly evident to me until I became honest with myself and I had the desire to do better for myself. One of the best decisions that I talked about and I made in recent years was going to sit with a therapist. Because while I've been, self-evaluating and reflecting, I find myself easily becoming depressed and overwhelmed and even anxious. And so I know that I suffer from overthinking and I'm very over-analytical. So when I finally sat with a therapist, I was able to process my thoughts and address these fears and my fears in a safe environment, and was able to receive good advice and some great, strong insight about myself that I normally wouldn't have heard from my own self-evaluation and reflection, But today I really want to talk about, 4 thoughts about the benefits of being self-aware. My first thought is you get to know yourself when you start becoming more self-aware. I'm a very observant person, so I see a lot of people who live their lives from a broken perspective. What I mean is that they spent a good majority of their time avoiding looking in the mirror. They typically absorb what they've been told by other external sources, like cheering sections, they got their supporters and stuff, and people who are cheering them on. And so that gives them the sense of value and sense of awareness from an outside source. They rely on that validation and celebration from the other people. And, social media becomes that safe haven for them. And so they don't have to be challenged to become self-aware. They seem to shy away from people or environments that may challenge them to be more self-aware. A few years ago, I honestly found myself in that same predicament. I was living my life from an outside perspective, and of myself. So, living that life from a different perspective, from the outside perspective, looking at myself. It was not until I was placed in a different environment, a new environment, where I was surrounded. Where I was in a different environment where I wasn't surrounded with a cheering section. You know, I was not surrounded with my comforts, my go-tos. And so I kind of had to finally face that music. I realized that maybe I'm not as great as I thought I was. Uh, and I was somewhat forced to look at the mirror at myself. It was scary at first, and it was definitely a tough realization, but it was definitely necessary. Which leads to my second thought on the benefits of being self-aware. You can embrace your vulnerability when you become more self-aware. As a man, the last thing you want to be is vulnerable. Especially for me when I got married and became a father, and I realized that in order to be a better functioning husband and father, I had to embrace my vulnerability. And without that, I had to really, if I didn't do that, I don't feel like I'll be as effective as a growing husband and as a growing father. And so I know my wife and I shared about in past podcasts, about the way we interact with one another and how we deal with challenges. And I know for sure that my wife, she has a strong sense of security when it comes to my decision making and things in my perspective. But I didn't get to that place overnight. I had to really show her, that side of me, that Clark Kent side of me. Those who listen to the podcast, Superman versus Clark Kent, know what I'm talking about. But that vulnerable side, and she got to again to see me outside of what that other strengths. She got to see my flaws, my imperfections, and stuff like that, which provided a better outlook, a safe haven for her to be who she is. And so, as for my daughter, as a father, you already know I had no choice with that. The minute that girl was born, I automatically became a sap. That girl got me wrapped around her fingers. Lord help. All the fathers of daughters know what I'm talking about. And so I'm a sucker when it comes to that. And so that was automatic. I can't even fight that. You know what I'm saying? I was vulnerable the minute she was born. So, but how about in the workplace? How do you deal with that? Especially that being tough with it being a hostile environment where there's constant stress and anxieties. Everyone is guarded and it's really tough to get things done there, in that type of environment. And for me, I remember when I was working at a hostile environment, I was kind of forced to look at myself and ask these uncomfortable questions about me. I had to ask myself, like, yo, do you know who you are? Like, Amos, do you know your worth? Why do you keep subjecting yourself to being mistreated and undervalued? And finally, what are you going to do about it, Amos? Those are some tough questions I really had to answer. And if I could not look in the mirror, I wouldn't have found solutions and ways to manage and deal with my value and seeing myself for who I really am. And so you'd be surprised when you finally look in the mirror and begin dealing with those uncomfortable things about yourself. You're experiencing that paradigm shift, that shift, and things start turning around for the better because you are looking at things from a whole perspective and not a broken perspective. When you decide to get on a path of wholeness, your decision making and your thought process begins shifting, and you find yourself avoiding those common mistakes from your days of being broken. Let's jump to my third thought on the benefits of being self-aware. You accept constructive criticism openly. There's a difference between dealing with constructive and destructive criticism. Constructive criticism typically comes from a place of building and strengthening, but destructive criticism typically comes from a place of destroying and weakening. You must not allow yourself or anything to destroy you or try to make you weak. You must take the time to know yourself, which can allow you to be comfortable with being vulnerable and open enough to receive constructive observations and criticisms. And it's also important to consider the source of your criticism. Uh, Meaning, if it's not coming from someone who you can glean from, who's adding value to you, then I'll definitely welcome it with open arms if it came from someone that you can glean from, that's actually adding value. Now, if it's not coming from that, and it's coming from someone who doesn't add value to your life, I'll definitely think twice about receiving that type of criticism, because it ends up becoming destructive. And so, I finally got to a place in my life where, I can learn, something from every experience, whether it's good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. But it took me some time to get to that place where, I can look at things from that lens, but every now and again, I'm challenged at looking at situations and learning from it. But, that's just how life is. Life is a continual journey, and, you may win some and you may lose some. So, but you just got to keep moving forward, and for my final thought, on the benefits of being self-aware, you love everyone as you love yourself. If you don't know by now, I am a Christian, and my favorite book, the Bible, it says in Matthew, and part of Matthew 22 verses 39, it says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." It's so important to love yourself. We're living in a world where there's so much hate. We're constantly seeing people standing for things that incite hate and anti-love. And for many of us, it gets us upset. We get mad, we get pissed off. And so our natural response is to, respond in hate, But I really encourage you to make sure that you love yourself. And I believe that the natural response from you loving yourself, especially to this foolishness that we see, is love. We respond with love. Now I can't expect my wife to love me if I don't love myself. That's like a waste. Gotta love yourself. Now, how do you love yourself? You gotta be able to embrace your flaws, your quirks, your strengths, your weaknesses. You gotta basically embrace you. Now I know that's embracing you can be easier said than done. So I encourage you to take the necessary steps at looking in the mirror at yourself, one flaw, one strength at a time. It's not an overnight process, and so it's taking me years to even get to this point where I am, where I can be more self-aware, meaning that I have gotten to know myself. I've embraced my vulnerability. I can accept constructive criticism openly. And, and I've learned to just love everyone as I love myself. And so, as we come to a close to this first season of Coffeehouse Conversations podcast, I am thankful. I am grateful. I am so humbled that you've chose to join this journey with me. I promise, when I come back in a few months, it's looking like August for season 2. I am looking forward to, giving more life-giving and insightful conversations and thoughts. I'll be sharing with great individuals across this country. Honestly, there was so much that I wanted to talk about this first season, but I've learned to pace myself, and so I can't wait to season 2, because, there's so much more I want to share, and I definitely want to grow with you in this journey, but I have to kind of take a break here because I'll be taking the next couple of weeks to get back in the studio and finish my 5th album, and I'm working on some more content for you. So I really need your help to help spread the word. Make sure you tell people to subscribe to this podcast and follow me on Instagram and Facebook. At ASJ Conversations. At ASJ Coffeehouse Conversations, and my personal page at AMOS St. John, SAINTJEAN. So follow me at ASJ Coffeehouse Conversations and Amos St. John. And, keep leaving the comments. Keep rating, rate the podcast, rate the episodes. And all this helps get me more traction and keeping things moving forward. You know what I mean? So I am so excited about this journey. I really hope that we remain connected and until we resume next season. So I definitely, again, thank you for joining this journey in this first season of this podcast. Until next time, thank you so much for listening to the Coffeehouse Conversations podcast.